Hi, everyone. We're live. It's Thursday. I'm Eddie Stone. Nice of you to join me. We've been having a good time on these lives here for the past several weeks. Certainly appreciate the comments and those of you that have decided to join us on these sessions. Today, I wanted to spend some time sharing with you one of my favorite books. In fact, it's one of my favorite books here in the past several years. I think it was first published in 2015. And we put the title up in the comment, or I should say the caption section of the live. And so this is the book, a little bit of a provocative title, How Not to Die. And this is written by Dr. Michael Greger. He's a medical doctor, and he's also sort of the brains and the drive behind the website, nutritionfacts.org. We've also put that up in the up on the post here so that you can see that. And I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, having been involved with this now for 30 some years, this is one of the best resources that is democratized, meaning that the information is sort of widely and freely available. It is financed in such a way that it's not influenced by big pharma or big food or other corporations that may have very specific agendas that are better for what they're doing, but not necessarily in your own best interest. So I want to talk about this book, and I also want to talk about it in context of this conversation we've been having about influence, because influence to me, along with thinking about vehicles, really the source of that power that you're giving yourself comes from knowledge. And so the more you read, the more you learn, the more examination you give to sort of, what you're consuming and what you're doing and how you're spending your time, the more you're going to begin to establish an example that others want to follow. So I want to spend some time on that. And spoiler alert, if you're kind of thinking about the book here, I'm going to talk about some of the details of the book. So I'm going to kind of warn you about that ahead of time. And I want to also reference a sister book called In Defense of Food, and this is by Michael Pollan. And Michael Pollan is a well-known author. Often you'll see his work, New York Times, The Atlantic, and other places. This is a guy that's really, as a layperson and as a reporter, really studied the impact of food. I'll read you his title line on the book is Eat Food, Not Too Much, Mostly Plants. It's simple, but that's really probably the very best advice we could probably give to ourselves, the best advice we could take in terms of what and how food matters. And the point of How Not to Die, which I do believe is an interesting title, is that food matters. And in fact, if you look at the major ways that we die, principally from cardiovascular disease and cancer, their biggest influences are what we eat and lifestyle. While genetics play a role, it's really much more of a limited role than I think we would like to think, right? We'd sort of like to blame it on our genetic history, but really and truly, it's what we're putting on the plate and what we're eating from the plate that really makes this major difference in not only our vulnerability to disease, right? I'm talking about risk factors, your chance of developing cancer, your chances of developing cardiovascular disease, but also recovery. Disease is a thing that happens, but the food that you're eating can play a big impact in how you handle treatment when you've got disease, also recovery, and then the long-term prognosis, as you're dealing with the aftermath of disease. And so food is one of those things that for most of us, I think it's sort of a casual kind of throwaway thing, because food means something different to everybody, right? It's fuel in its very basic sense. It's pleasure, it's entertainment. And for others, it can be trouble just in terms of almost addictive because of the emotional attachment that can come with it. But it's a complicated part of our lives, and I think we tend to overcomplicate it in that regard. And so in reading these books, the reason I brought these up today is I've been talking about in this series here, developing influence and vehicles. Well, the vehicle that you're in, right? The vehicle, whether it's Touchstone Essentials or other things that you're doing, right? They're carrying you somewhere. And it's important for us to consider, are we going where we want to go? As we sort of assess things, right? We look in the mirror and we think to ourselves, man, am I where I want to be in life at this age, at this point, relative to my health or my appearance or whatever that happens to be? And if you're not, what you've got to recognize is that changes can be made. And reading books like this can give you hints, clues, tips. And I'll tell you for myself, right, there are individuals that sort of like to rip the Band-Aid off, right, on bad habits or trying to make changes. And I'm all for that if that fits within the framework of your personality. But for me, I think mostly I'm trying to think about the arc of where I'm going, because I have a better time sort of mentally managing the arc of where I'm trying to get to. So, I may not be exactly where I want to be today, but because of travel or commitments or the holiday season or whatever it happens to be, I can look at trying to make some changes and think, man, that's so daunting. I don't think I can do that here in this, sort of short period of time. And if you're not careful, you can kind of forget that inspiration that you had and those habits that you wanted to adopt and change. And all of a sudden, nothing has happened 6 months later, 12 months later, 24 months later, 36 months later. And instead of staying static, which rarely happens, you're actually in a worse situation than you were before. And so for me, I look at books like this, which are brilliantly broken into chapters addressing very specific issues. And you could just decide to take one chapter and take the next 90 days and try to adopt some of the things being suggested in that chapter. And by no means are these books the only books that sort of address these types of issues. There are others out there, but let me caution you on being discerning on where you're getting sort of health, diet, and lifestyle input or advice. Make sure you kind of look at the background of the author and look at the material and ask yourself, is this the type of thing that's a fad, or is it a growing trend, or the type of information that can stand the test of time? And so that's really the reason I brought those up today. And shamelessly, I also want to tie those into what we do at Touchstone Essentials, because our products are really based on these types of priorities and consciousness. If you look at our Super Green Juice, right, which is an incredible product. I'm very proud of this product in terms of its performance and characteristics, 44 different superfoods, but it follows this notion of food. I mean, these are real plants, fruits, and vegetables harvested at their peak of nutritional maturity, organic practices, certified USDA. And so one of the things it addresses that in the modern world, in a busy lifestyle, it's a convenient way to get food, not isolate, not artificial items, into your diet. And that's really true philosophically with our approach. And if not our products, then find the products that you do like, that's origins are based on food and not lab science. Because what we know is that food stands the test of time. You can't walk away from the fact that food has hundreds, if not thousands, of compounds in it, right? That all work synergistically, and that's really where the power is, right? As great as man is, we've put somebody on the moon, or we've got some staggering accomplishments, but we've not been able to go into a lab and make an apple, right? Or any other food. Now, I realize there's some lab foods right now that are substitute meat products, but that's not by any means what I'm talking about, because by no stretch do they have the kind of nutritional density and value that we're looking for. They may be good in terms of helping people break free of having a mostly animal protein diet, but that's really not what we're talking about here. I'll just be candid about it. For me, one of the very earliest health habits that I adopted was to think about how much ultra-processed food I was consuming, whether that was packaged foods coming from the grocery store, from instant oatmeals to TV-like dinners, or whatever that happens to be, or the amount of fast food that I was consuming. In my 20s and early 30s, way too much fast food, or what I call commercial food or ultra-processed food, that was causing my cholesterol to be too high, raising my risk of type 2 diabetes. So the first thing I had to do in this arc of health that I was trying to get to was read some books, get some knowledge, and recognize that I needed to cut back. I wasn't ready to make a wholesale change, but I was ready to change that arc. And ultimately changing that arc, the beginning of that process almost 30 years ago, today puts me in a position where I'm probably in better shape at 56 than I was at 46 or 36, and frankly, probably even 26, right? And I've still got goals and things that I want to accomplish. And so what I'm encouraging you to do today, number one, I want you to pick up this book and I want you to read it, even if it's just 10 pages every couple of weeks, right? And start to think about it in context of what you're trying to do, because this vehicle that we're working with, right? Touchstone is a vehicle to better health, to optimize your health. It's a vehicle for good. It's a vehicle to get to the beach. All of those have an undercurrent of developing your example and your influence. And where it starts is with knowledge. So today, I want you to get the book. I want you to read it, digest it. Happy to have a discussion with you about the book. And then I want you to think about, sincerely, where are you at on this continuum? Are you where you want to be? And if you are, man, you have my applause and my congratulations. I'm proud, because it's not easy to maintain these things with all the sweets or enticing advertisings or whatever happens to be, right? But if you're not where you are, then identify where you want to be 1 year from now, right? If it's daunting too much to think about 30 days from now or 90 days from now, where do you want to be in a year? Where do you want to be in 3 years? And what are the steps that you need to adopt to start walking in that direction, right? We've got a vehicle to get you in that can help to bridge that gap between where you want to be and where you are today. But you've got to make an assessment and you've got to make a commitment. Maybe that's the last thing I'll talk about. I'm big on commitment, right? And on one of our prior talks, we talked about thinking about how important it is to you on a scale of 1 to 10. What would you change that you're really committed to that could make an impact on this arc of where you're going to? So that's what I wanted to bring to everybody's attention today. So the 2 books that I've talked about today, How Not to Die, and I'll give you the tips here. Stay away from as much ultra-processed food as you can. Eat mostly plants and don't eat too much. Michael Pollan's In Defense of Food. And these are base books to develop that education to help you be all you can possibly be. For us, it's all about maximizing our potential and being the best person, the best version of ourselves we can possibly be. With that, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you for your time.